Based on the amount of seed information available to growers in the past, I get the impression that it was a bit like throwing darts when it came to choosing an ideal seed. Not anymore. With data collected from field trials, input from seed organizations, and the advent of the internet, now more than ever there's a wealth of information available for growers. But with the many seed varieties to choose from, it's essential that you make the best educated choice about which seed to put in the ground to help ensure you'll have a good yield come harvest. Publications such as Seed Manitoba have made that sort of decision making much easier than in years past. But how can you narrow down which seed choices might work best for you? Well, as you'll hear from Dennis Lange with Manitoba Agriculture, it involves exchanging a dart for a highlighter. Hi, I'm here with Provincial Pulse and Soybean Specialist Dennis Lange with Manitoba Agriculture, and he's been working with the team at the Manitoba Cooperator for the 2025 edition of Seed Manitoba. Dennis, how has that been going so far?
You know, every year it's a process. It all takes a lot of information and a lot of time that goes into it. But you know, at the end of the day, to have the finished product for the growers and for industry is well worth it.
Exactly. You know, we certainly thank you for your time. Now, the 2025 issue is no different than past years. It's chock full of a lot of seed information, different varieties and all that. It could be a bit daunting for growers if they crack it open and have a look inside, but you've come up with a method that growers can use to hopefully narrow down the seed choices that they use. Dennis, could you tell me a little bit about that, please?
Well, it's something I call the highlighter test. Okay. And when it's used properly, it will give you a picture of how each crop type will do at different locations. It's to be used with any single site year data. Okay. So for an example, in soybeans, we have sites in Arborg, Beausejour, and Stonewall, as well as the core sites, which are Carmen, Portage, St. Adolphe, and Morris. In that table, when you look at the bottom of the table, what you'll see in the gray section is you'll see something called CV, which is coefficient of variance. Okay. That tells you how good the trial is. The lower the number, generally under 10, that means it's a very well-run trial, not a lot of variation, not a lot of other factors that are contributing to what the yield numbers are showing, giving you true genetic potential of the varieties that you see. But the number that you're interested in is what's called the LSD. Okay. That stands for least significant difference. What that means is that whatever that value is for a given site, any two varieties that you're comparing within the table have to be different by that amount. So for example, the Arborg table this year shows 10%. That number is generated from the stats that are run on the individual trial and will be different for each location. Right. So if you see that 10%, you highlight that LSD with your nice pink highlighter and you go across the bottom, and then what you do is you take another color highlighter, let's say in this case blue, and you go up the table, and anything that is 10% greater than your check, so our check is P006 A37X, anything that is 10% greater, you highlight in green, and you go all the way down that column. Okay. So for the Arborg site, you might see 3 different varieties that are high, statistically higher yielding. Okay. You do the same thing, grab yourself a yellow highlighter, and anything that is 90% less, so 10% less than the check, right. So 90 or lower, you highlight in yellow. And if you do that for each site, you know, the Beausejour site, will the CV or the LSD is 11%, do the same process. What you'll get is a little checkerboard pattern of different colors. Okay. Okay. You'll have the green, which are your higher yielding than the check, which generally at each site you might see maybe 2 or 3 varieties that are out yielding the check. You might see a few more yellow varieties on certain years because those yellow varieties usually are the earlier season varieties that don't yield as much as what a mid or long season variety does, depending on the growing season, right? But the information that is also important is anything that's not highlighted. Anything that is not highlighted is the same yield as the check. Oh, okay. So if your LSD is 10 at Arborg and your yield is 105%, that tells me it's the same yield as the check. Because we choose such a strong check, as long as you're staying within your maturity group, you're picking a good variety. Okay. And because the varieties are listed from earliest maturing at the top to longest maturing at the bottom, if you see a variety that maybe doesn't have any green or yellow in it, okay, but it's all clear, that means that variety is the same yield as a check, but because it's earlier, it'll give you a few more days advantage as far as harvestability goes, right? Because the crop matures earlier, right?
Okay.
So those are the things you look at. And any table that has an LSD in it, you can use this same process. Highlight the LSD first, highlight the check so you know what you're comparing it to. In this case, we have a known check. And then you go through this process, and eventually it will help you pick a variety. Now, what some growers say to me, well, I only want to look at the site that's closest to me, right?
But look at other sites as well.
You want, yeah. But the advantage of looking at multiple sites is that if you only look at one site, you only know what the weather was like at that one site for this past year. You don't know what the forecast is going to be for next year. If you look at all the sites, though, that'll pretty much give you a good idea on how a variety performs under different weather patterns, different amounts of moisture, different planting dates. All those factors kind of play into it. So it's just another way of using it, and you can use this for the wheat trials, the individual site years for that as well. Once you've kind of picked your variety there, then you go back to the main part of the table, the variety description table. You look at the long-term yield. And long-term yield will have a number of site years, which is basically the number of different locations that's been tested. So if a variety's been tested for 21 site years, that means that if you have 7 site years per season, that's been tested over 3 growing seasons. The higher the site years, the better it is, because then you know you're confident in the yield results. So it's a bit of a process, but get yourself a few highlighters and walk yourself through it. In the end, it's a very quick way of doing it to really show that are there differences between varieties or are there not differences between varieties.
Perfect. Well, it sounds like it's a pretty simple method to kind of run through a couple times once you do it. So it's just a matter of knowing what to highlight and what not to highlight. So.
And I've done this at different meetings with growers, and I bring the highlighters along. And it's kind of fun to do actually, because it gives you a really good impression of how a trial performs. And it also helps eliminate some of the sales pitch stuff, right?
Okay.
Because this information that's being calculated is a true representation of the genetic potential of those varieties.
It's verified data.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Perfect. Well, thank you very much for your time, Dennis.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And look forward to the 2025 edition of Seed Manitoba in early December.